The forest was quieter than usual that morning. The mist clung to the ground like breath that refused to fade. Near the edge of the park, an old man walked slowly, cane tapping against the damp earth. Walter hadn't been back here since that day, the day the forest took his fear and gave him purpose. But something felt different now. The air carried a sound he couldn't ignore, a faint cry, distant yet familiar. He froze. It wasn't the wind. It was the cry of another cub, and this time it was calling his name. Walter paused at the tree line, his breath clouding in the cool morning air. Every instinct told him to turn back, to let the forest keep its silence, but something deep in his chest wouldn't let him move. He adjusted his coat, feeling the familiar ache in his ribs, a souvenir from the bullet that almost ended his story months ago. The doctors had called it luck. Walter called it unfinished business. The cry came again, soft, pleading, somewhere between pain and fear. He followed the sound through the mist, branches brushing against his shoulders, the scent of pine thick around him. The forest felt alive, watching him, whispering with every gust of wind. "Easy now," he muttered under his breath, as if the trees themselves needed calming. Then he saw it, a small figure near the stream, half hidden beneath fallen leaves and mud. Another bear cub, smaller than the last one he'd met, its fur tangled, its movements weak. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single trembling creature. He stepped closer, slowly, boots sinking into wet soil. The cub looked up, eyes wide and glassy with exhaustion. One paw was caught in a rusted trap, the cruel metal biting deep into its flesh. Walter's stomach turned. Not again. His pulse quickened with something between rage and heartbreak. He knelt beside the cub, ignoring the sting in his knees. "You poor thing," he whispered. "Who would do this?" The cub whimpered softly, the sound fragile and human-like. Walter reached out, speaking gently, the same way he once spoke to his daughter when she was too scared to sleep. "It's okay. I'm here now." He studied the trap, old, crude, the kind illegal trappers used deep in the valley. The same kind that had scarred the first cub's mother. His hands trembled as he pried at the rusted teeth, the metal groaning in protest. The cub flinched but didn't pull away. It was trusting him, just like before. After what felt like forever, the trap snapped open with a sharp clang. The cub collapsed onto its side, paw bleeding freely. Walter tore a strip from his sleeve and wrapped it tight. "You're safe now," he murmured. But as he lifted the cub into his arms, the forest went utterly still. No birds, no wind, just silence. Heavy, unnatural. He turned toward the shadowed ridge, heart pounding. He'd been here before, and he knew what silence like that meant. Somewhere out there, a mother was watching. Walter stayed perfectly still, the cub trembling softly in his arms. He could feel its heartbeat, fast, panicked, fragile, beating against his chest. He whispered, "You're okay, little one." But his eyes stayed fixed on the tree line ahead. The forest had a rhythm, and he had learned to listen to it. The sudden stillness wasn't emptiness, it was warning. Somewhere between the trunks, something large moved with deliberate grace, its presence heavy enough to shift the air. Walter took a slow step backward. "She's close," he murmured. The cub whimpered again, as if answering. Its tiny paw twitched against his shirt. The sound echoed faintly through the woods, carried by the mist. And then, from deep within the shadows, came a low, guttural sound, a mother's call. Long, drawn out, aching. Walter's throat tightened. The last time he'd heard that sound, he'd almost died. But this wasn't the same bear. The tone was different, less fury, more fear. She wasn't hunting. She was searching. He looked down at the cub's paw, the blood soaking through the makeshift bandage. If he left it here, it wouldn't survive. But if he stayed, the mother might mistake him for a threat. He had only one choice: trust the forest again. He knelt beside the stream, setting the cub gently onto a bed of moss. "You have to let her find you," he said softly. "That's how this works." The cub looked at him with glassy eyes, weak but aware. It tilted its head, the same small, innocent gesture he remembered from before. For a moment, Walter saw his daughter's face again, the way she'd looked at him from her hospital bed all those years ago. Helpless, scared, still trusting that he could make everything better. The memory hit him like a wave. He clenched his jaw. "Not this time," he whispered. "I won't lose another one." A rustle broke through the trees. Branches shifted. The sound of heavy breathing filled the clearing. Walter turned slowly, his pulse hammering in his ears. The mother bear emerged from the mist, massive, scarred, and limping. Her eyes locked onto the cub, then to him. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The forest held its breath. Walter raised his hand slightly, his voice trembling but calm. "He's hurt but alive." The bear's gaze flicked to the cub, then back to him. She took a cautious step forward, sniffing the air. The tension in Walter's chest tightened like a vice. "It's all right," he said, barely above a whisper. "I'm not your enemy." The cub let out a soft cry. That was enough. The mother lowered her head, pressing her snout gently against its body. The sound that followed was something Walter had never heard before, a deep rumble, not anger, not warning, but relief. He stepped back slowly, giving her space. The bear nuzzled her cub, then turned her eyes to him again, eyes filled with something that wasn't wild instinct but understanding. For a long second, they just looked at each other, two creatures carrying the same kind of grief. Then, from behind them, the faint crunch of tires on gravel shattered the moment. Walter turned sharply. A vehicle. Headlights flickered through the trees. His heart sank. He recognized that sound. It wasn't the rescue team this time. The sound grew louder, an engine grinding through mud and gravel, followed by the metallic click of a door slamming shut. Walter's breath caught. He moved quickly, crouching behind a fallen tree. The cub nestled close against its mother. The bear lifted her head, ears twitching, a low rumble vibrating in her chest. From the fog, two silhouettes emerged. Men in camouflage jackets, heavy boots, rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders. Poachers. Walter felt the familiar chill of recognition crawl up his spine. He'd seen men like them before, faces that wore cruelty like a second skin. "Tracks end here," one said, voice sharp and impatient. "Must have dragged itself into the woods." "Good," the other replied. "That means it's weak." "The cubs, too." Walter's pulse thundered in his ears. Cubs. There was more than one. He scanned the trees quickly. Only the small, injured one lay beside him. The thought twisted his stomach. How many traps had they set? The older man leaned on his rifle, spitting into the dirt. "Boss wants them alive," said the last batch fetched double overseas. Walter's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He'd spent his life chasing monsters like these, and still they kept crawling out of the dark. He felt his body move before his mind caught up. He stepped out from behind the tree. "Leave them." Both men spun, startled. One raised his weapon halfway. "Who the hell are you?" "Just someone who's seen enough of your kind," Walter said quietly. His voice didn't shake. The younger poacher smirked. "Old man's lost, huh?" "Maybe," Walter said, stepping closer. "But I know what you're doing. That's an endangered mother with a wounded cub. You take one more step toward them, and you'll regret it." The older one laughed, a deep, cruel sound. "You think you can stop us with words?" "No," Walter said softly, "but the forest might." Before either of them could react, the mother bear rose to her full height. Her roar ripped through the clearing, so loud, so primal that even the mist seemed to flinch. The men stumbled backward, fear flashing across their faces. One fired into the air, the sound echoing through the valley. Walter shouted, "Don't! You'll make her attack." But it was too late. The cub cried out at the gunshot, pressing against its mother's leg. The bear's fury turned to protectiveness, her growl deepening. She stepped between the men and her cub, body heaving, eyes wild. "Run!" Walter yelled, but the poachers didn't move fast enough. The bear lunged forward, massive, unstoppable, but she didn't strike. Instead, she slammed her paw into the ground inches from their boots, sending mud and roots flying. It was a warning, not an attack. The men turned and bolted, stumbling through the brush toward their truck. The older one shouted into a radio, "Get the others. We've got company out here." Others. Walter's heart dropped. This wasn't just two men. It was a full hunting crew. He looked back at the mother bear, panting, trembling from the effort. She wasn't built for another fight, not in her condition. The cub pressed against her chest, whimpering softly. Walter knelt beside them. "We have to move," he whispered, though he wasn't sure where. The forest answered before he could think. A faint flash of light flickered through the mist, headlamps. Coming fast, Walter scooped the cub into his arms and looked at the mother. "Come on," he urged quietly. "Follow me." She hesitated, torn between instinct and trust. Then, as if remembering the way he'd helped before, she lumbered after him, limping but determined. They pushed through the undergrowth, Walter wincing as branches tore at his coat. Behind them, engines roared. The sound of boots, shouts, and snapping twigs filled the air. They reached a narrow gully, a dry riverbed carved deep into the forest floor. Walter slid down first, clutching the cub close. The bear followed, stumbling but steady. They crouched in a hollow, hearts pounding. Above them, flashlight beams cut across the trees like searching eyes. "Spread out," one of the men yelled. "Find them before sunrise." Walter pressed a hand against the cub's fur, his other hand clutching a fallen branch like a weapon. The bear's heavy breathing filled the silence, each exhale visible in the cold air. He whispered, "We'll wait till they pass, then we'll move." Minutes crawled by like hours. Footsteps came close, too close. A shadow paused right above the ridge, light sweeping across the gully. Walter held his breath. The cub whimpered faintly, and the beam froze on them. "There," the man shouted. Walter's body reacted before his mind could. He threw the branch like a spear, hitting the man square in the chest. The flashlight tumbled into the dirt as the poacher stumbled backward, cursing. "Over here," he yelled. Walter turned to the bear. "Go. Take the cub." But she didn't run. She stood tall beside him, teeth bared, ready to protect not just her young, but him. The forest erupted again, shouts, lights, chaos. Walter felt the old fire rise inside him, the one that had made him a rescuer, not just of animals, but of souls. He whispered, almost to himself, "Not this time. You're not taking them." And as the poachers closed in, the night itself seemed to tremble, waiting for what would come next. The forest had turned into a battlefield of sound. Shouting, the crack of branches, the distant growl of engines echoing through the mist. Walter crouched low in the gully, every muscle screaming for rest. The cub whimpered quietly beside him, its mother standing protectively over them both, her massive frame shadowed by the pale moonlight filtering through the trees. Above the ridge, flashlights flickered like restless stars. "I see movement down there," a voice shouted. The crunch of boots drew closer. Walter's grip tightened around the fallen branch in his hand, splintered, useless, but it was all he had. He leaned toward the bear, whispering, "If anything happens, you run. Take the cub and go." She blinked, her breath warm against his face. It was a ridiculous thing to say to a wild animal, but something in her eyes made him believe she understood. Then, chaos exploded. Two men slid down the slope, their boots kicking up dirt and leaves. One shined a flashlight straight into Walter's eyes. The other raised a rifle. Walter didn't think, he just moved. He lunged forward, shoving the rifle aside as it fired, the shot slicing the air above him. The bear roared, a thunderous, shaking sound that made the forest quake. The second man panicked, fumbling backward. "Shoot it! Shoot it!" he yelled, his voice cracking. But the bear didn't strike to kill. She swiped the rifle from his hands, sending it clattering into the dark. The cub cried out, and Walter turned just in time to see another man appear at the top of the ridge, older, broader, the kind of figure that carried command. Riek. Walter's breath caught. He'd thought the man was gone, arrested, maybe even dead. But there he stood, scar across his cheek, the same cold grin twisting his mouth. "You again," Riek said, voice low and venomous. "I should have known the forest would spit you back out." Walter's pulse hammered in his ears. "You never change, do you?" Riek raised his rifle, leveling it at the bear. "You don't understand, old man. This isn't about you. It's about money. Survival." "Then you've forgotten what that word means," Walter said, stepping forward. Survival isn't about killing what's innocent. Riek sneered. You think these animals care about you? You're just another fool who can't let go of his guilt. Walter didn't answer. The cub whimpered, pressing against his leg. Behind him, the bear growled low, ready. Move aside, Riek warned. Or I'll put all three of you down. Walter met his eyes. You can try. Riek fired. The sound cracked through the forest like lightning. The bullet hit the dirt near Walter's feet, spraying mud. The bear roared and charged, not blindly, but with fury honed by pain. Riek stumbled back, firing again, the shot grazing her shoulder. She didn't stop. Her massive paw slammed into the ground, inches from his legs. Riek fell backward, scrambling in the dirt. Walter ran toward him, adrenaline overriding fear. He tackled Riek, grabbing for the gun. The two men struggled, rolling through mud and roots. The weapon fired again, the shot vanishing into the night. Walter's hand found a rifle barrel, jerking it upward. The gun flew from Riek's grasp, clattering into the stream. Riek punched him hard across the jaw. Walter fell back, dazed, tasting blood. You should have stayed dead. Riek hissed, drawing a knife from his belt. He lunged. Walter caught his wrist, the blade gleaming inches from his throat. The years had made his body slow, but his will was still iron. He forced Riek's hand back, muscles trembling, his vision swimming. Then a sound. A roar, deeper than before, closer. Riek froze. The mother bear loomed behind him, blood streaking her fur, eyes blazing gold in the mist. He turned just as she struck, swatting the knife from his hand and sending him sprawling into the dirt. The blade flew, sinking into a fallen log. Riek scrambled backward, screaming. Stay back. He reached for the gun in the stream, but Walter stepped on it first, kicking it away. The bear advanced, her chest heaving, a low growl rolling from her throat. Not rage this time, but something deeper. Justice. Riek lifted his hands. Please, he stammered. I'll leave. I swear. Walter stepped closer, his voice hoarse but steady. You already had your chance. Riek's gaze darted between them. The old man, the bear, the cub trembling behind. They're animals, he shouted. You can't choose them over your own kind. Walter's eyes hardened. Maybe that's the problem. My kind forgot how to feel. For a moment, everything went still. The forest, the mist, even the breath of the earth seemed to wait. The bear let out one final roar, powerful, raw, echoing through the trees like thunder. Riek stumbled back, slipped on the mud, and disappeared into the ravine below, his scream fading into silence. Walter dropped to his knees, his lungs burning, heart pounding. The mother bear stood before him, panting heavily, her massive head lowering until her eyes met his. He reached out slowly, trembling. It's over, he whispered. The cub limped toward them, pressing its small body against her leg. The bear let out a deep rumble, softer this time, and brushed her snout lightly against Walter's shoulder. For a heartbeat, he felt her warmth, the same warmth he'd once felt holding his daughter's hand in that hospital bed. Then she turned, gathering her cub, and disappeared into the mist. Walter sat there for a long moment, the sounds of the forest slowly returning. The chirp of crickets, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through the leaves. He looked down at his hands, shaking and dirty, but alive. Behind him, faint red lights cut through the fog. Rescue vehicles, sirens wailing softly in the distance. He closed his eyes, letting the noise wash over him. He had survived again, but this time, he didn't feel like a survivor. He felt like someone who had finally kept a promise. The forest was quiet again. The mist had thinned, revealing streaks of pale morning light that filtered through the treetops, painting the ground gold. Walter sat on a fallen log near the stream, his clothes torn, his breath shallow, his hands streaked with mud and blood that wasn't all his. The sirens had faded somewhere down the road, leaving behind only the soft hum of life returning. He looked toward the ridge where the bear had vanished with her cub. The silence there wasn't empty, it was full, sacred, like a held breath after a prayer. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, with a groan, he reached in his coat pocket and pulled out his old notebook. the one he carried since the day everything changed. He flipped to a blank page, the edges damp from the morning air, and began to write. Some things come back when you least expect them, not to haunt you, but to remind you what still matters. He paused, staring at the trembling lines of ink. His hands ached, his body was tired, but his heart felt strangely still, peaceful. From somewhere deep in the forest came a faint sound, a soft growl, followed by two smaller cries. He smiled, closing his eyes. "You made it," he whispered. He didn't need to see them to know. The forest had kept its promise. A light breeze stirred the leaves, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, the same scent that had filled the air the day the first cub found him. Only this time, the feeling was different. It wasn't guilt that filled him. It was gratitude. He looked up through the canopy, where the sunlight broke in golden shards. "Thank you," he murmured, to the bears, to the forest, to the second chance he'd never thought he'd earn. As he rose to his feet, his knees creaked, his breath hitched, but there was a faint smile on his face. He tucked the notebook back in his pocket and took one last look at the trees before turning toward the trail that led home. Behind him, the forest stirred softly, alive again. A place once haunted by pain now whispered only peace. And as Walter disappeared down the path, the sound of the cub's call echoed once more, gentle, distant, but full of life. A promise kept, and a story finally complete.